Hello and welcome to Power Reflections, a proud member of the Doof Network where we reflect on Wildbow's most dashing work as it releases. I'm Ruben Morehouse.
And I'm Elliot Diebold.
And before we get into today's episode, remember, we're gearing up for All Packed Up 2, All Paled Up Beyond the Pale. So, why don't you tell us about another segment that we're going to have coming up, Elliot?
Yeah, sure. One of the other ones we've got planned is we're just calling it Pale the Musical. Basically, it'll just be a session where us and the audience brainstorm what Pale would look like as a musical. Those of you who tuned into All Packed Up 1 might remember we did this with Packed as well, and it was a personal highlight segment for me at least. Um, Almost more as a spectator, though Ruben really ran the show. But I'm
It
excited
was
to
a
do this again.
it was a very weird one, wasn't it? But yeah, I very much enjoyed it. Very silly kind of segment. If you want to see what it was like, I'm sure you can find the VOD on our YouTube channel somewhere. Um,
Yes.
but yeah, it'll be a delight. So with that, let's get on to Dash to Pieces 11.11. Make a wish, Elliot. You wished for another Verona chapter, and here it is. We're in Verona's head as the Kennetiers are trailing a complex spirit, seeing some old friends before breaking into some random person's garage.
It took me a second to be like, "What's the wish thing?" And then I remembered we had this conversation when we did 11:11 of Pack.
Did we? Do you not? Are you not
No,
familiar with the 11.11 thing?
I've only heard of it twice in my life, and it's been the two 11:11 chapters we've covered for other verse stories.
All right. Well, now you know. And when we cover Wildbow's next story and we get to that 11.11, this time I want you to
Yeah,
remember.
I'll be ready.
Yeah. But yeah, what did you think of the start of this chapter?
Yeah, it's very fun. It's like a great lead into stuff we'll talk about in the next chapter as well, because it's immediately really reminding us like Verona is somebody who holds back, as
Yeah.
they're chasing this complex spirit. Um, but like the highlight really is that she borrows Snowdrop's sense of smell, and that's going to tie into the Half Light stuff as well. But it's also just really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. It's it's fun stuff. It's starting us out with just a bit more kind of spirit conflict, which has been the stage that has been set for this part of the story. Um, I love that Verona thinks the car boy
Yeah,
Echo has come back, but then turns out it's an echo of the boy's mother who's also traumatized by her young son almost getting hit by a car, I suppose.
Yeah, that was a very fun moment where, like, you see the boy again, and it's just like, "What the hell? I thought we fixed this." Like, it was a great little "what the fuck" moment.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, and then we see it's the mom, and like, I guess I've just been thinking because I was a bit confused when Verona put the echo of the boy back into him. That it seemed to almost register the echo as like a moment, like a lesson that he was learning. Like I'm almost getting this vibe that echoes aren't just raw imprints of emotion and stuff, but a lot of them are probably also it's like specifically stuff that maybe we don't deal with and we don't handle and we like shed the moment. Like I'm thinking of Edith's first echo was like the discarded pyromania from whatever the hell her name was again.
Yeah,
uh,
Sydney, I think it was.
yes, yes. Yeah, like I guess I'm just like now I'm wondering if it's like, with this kid and his mom, this moment happened and they never like really dealt with it. And as they tried to like forget it, that's what causes in part like that the emotion of that to manifest as an echo. So it's like in a way, echoes aren't just like scars of emotion, but they're literally also like just the scars people are leaving around the place when they don't deal with shit.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I like the idea that it's not just I mean, we've seen a lot about echoes and kind of ghosts in traditional media that are caused by remnants of horrific events. But I like that there's a bit more of a human, I guess, element to it in this interpretation.
Yeah, well, it almost ties into the old like unfinished business thing because it's like if you don't emotionally deal with something and suppress it, like in this world, it can start to manifest as an echo, maybe.
Yeah, yeah, I like it. Um, I also like in this part of the chapter, uh, the bit where Verona sends Snowdrop into the garage first to set up an excuse in case they get busted being in there, which they end up doing, and it works perfectly. It's like a classic Verona being really good at the lying and manipulating stuff. It's
Yeah.
very good.
Um, yeah, I especially because like Lucy's gonna scold Toadswallow later for like the difference between honesty and telling the truth, and that's like a line that Verona has just consistently been very good at walking.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And yeah, I mean, Verona has been worried about you know, about falling behind the other two, but this is a great example of her having skills that are wonderful.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean something we've been talking about. I feel like since Arc 2 is that all three of them do this thing where in their chapters, in their heads, it's like, oh, they're so good at X, Y, and Z, and I'm just letting the team down. It's like, yeah, people are just really bad at like noticing their own strengths and are much better at focusing on like what they're falling behind in, and these three just do it all the time.
Mm, yeah, yeah, they do. Yeah. So they're in the garage, and Lucy takes charge on this fight, setting up an arena and taking on this spirit. It's a tough fight, but Lucy does pull ahead.
Yeah, I'm loving the arena constantly coming back. Still one of my favorite things that Lucy can do.
Mm,
Um, Especially I love the vibe in this one where it's like Lucy's in there fighting it, and then like the other three are kind of cheating a little bit because they're just standing on the perimeter and picking off like echoes as they get dislodged and stuff. Like it's a little cheaty, but
yeah.
it's cool.
Yeah, it's definitely sneaky. I love, we every time we see the arena, we kind of get it more and more. And Lucy pulls out the knowledge that if she drops the arena to kind of end this 1v1, it counts as a in some ways a victory, which grants power to her combatant, right? Um, and I just like it kind of hit me. We've only ever seen Lucy win fights in these arenas, right? But I am worried that the more times we see it, the higher the chance that Lucy will accidentally underestimate an enemy and end up losing a 1v1, and it's gonna I don't know what the impacts are gonna be, but I'm kind of terrified.
Yeah, it's a high risk, high reward strategy in a way because yeah, the vibe is like as the person who initiates the challenge, she's the one who sort of has to decisively win it for it to help her.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, you're right. If she encounters someone who's going to beat her, she's going to lose like in a very strong way, which is not good.
Yeah, and who knows what the loss in that kind of contest is going to look like. The fact that it's a more formalized contest means a temporary loss that Lucy might suffer with less impact in other fights. We've seen fights where Lucy has been kind of, taken out of action or whatever, as like suffers a kind of setback in the battle. But if that happens in one of these kind of arena brawls, because of the formalized challenge of it, it's going to basically amplify the shittiness of it. I'm kind of worried to see what's going to happen.
Yeah, which is a very fairy sort of thing to do.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so they vanquish the this spirit,
Yeah,
head
sorry,
out. Mm,
it's a shame they didn't get through to the spirit.
yeah,
Like, it kind of sounds like Edith did a nice thing for this spirit. And I don't know. I guess I'm sad that it didn't want to or couldn't find that stuff to round it out and make it better. Like it got in a way it kind of helps to validate to an extent some of what Edith talked about how she was like a bit stuck on the path that Sydney started her on in a way.
yeah, yeah. You're right. It's interesting. It's interesting. Yeah, I guess it sucks, but like at the same time, they can't spend energy fighting every single battle, right? Like
Oh yeah.
this is kind of the lesson that Lucy needs to learn a bit is like, and I think she's starting to learn it maybe a little too well with some of these spirits that she can't fight every battle in a perfect optimal way.
Yeah, no, I don't really think the Kenneteers did anything wrong here. It's just like it just sucks every time they're sort of like, "Hey, can we make this work?" And the spirit just kind of forces their hand. And I guess it just felt extra shitty for this one because I was like, "Oh, I could actually back Edith's play here of like, hey." instead of killing you, I'm going to give you a chance to go out there and be better. And the fact
Yeah.
that this thing just wasted that is just sort of like it's been given so many chances, and it sucks to see them all wasted.
Yeah. It does kind of suck that sometimes the others are just gonna have to, you can't save every other. Not every other is salvageable and human, I suppose.
Well, yeah, you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved, and
Yeah.
this other gives off the vibes that that's what it like that's where it's at.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, they vanquish this spirit and then go to the Goblin Bar to meet Sir Toad Swallow. We haven't been giving him his proper honorific recently, but you're right, we should.
Well, he's getting it more now that he's actually the mayor, which I like. But yeah, like as if I wasn't excited enough for this meeting already. Just like this introduction of like the Goblin Hovel, which has this very like college fraternity or sorority, like the day after a party vibe, was already great. And then fucking Toadslaw is sitting behind the bar, fucking like acting like the barkeep, like polishing a glass. I was just like, I'm so fucking ready for this. Like he's we're gonna get into it more, but he's such a fairy. Like this is such a dramatic, stupid thing to do to like put himself in the role of the bartender. I was so ready for it.
Yeah, it's good, isn't it? It's very I mean, of course it's goblins, so it has a fun vibe, but the goblins being kind of gathered in a bar and effectively taking up the position of almost like a Cheers-esque sitcom of a bunch of crazy characters spread around. I mean, not even crazy characters. It's effectively a bar full of drunk children, right? Which is just fun.
Yeah, and like we can't really pull them all out, but there's like a dozen just hilarious moments scattered throughout all of this, like the bit where Verona has to go get Pecker Snot, bit where Cherry Pop tries to snoop and listen to them, and actually makes herself more conspicuous. Like there's there's like whenever you get a group of goblins like this, there's just so many little gags while Bo sneaks in, and they're great.
Mm, yeah, just little like fun bits and side moments and stuff.
Yeah.
So Snowdrop takes charge and clears out the goblins as the Kenneteers ask Toad a bit more about his plans for the town.
Yes, and before we get into that properly, like, okay, we need to talk about the fact that Charles has somehow gotten out of this. Like, he says he'll see them in 2 days or something,
Mm.
and I'm just like Charles, buddy, I'm trying to stay on team. You're innocent, but this just feels suspicious as fuck, right? Like, because it goes from Charles will see you in 2 days to you have a day to deal with Maricica. Like, I don't know. I've tried not to tinfoil about Charles, but it just the longer he keeps avoiding being in the story, the more and more suspicious I'm becoming.
Yeah, I'm kind of there. I mean, I'm maybe weaving in a bit of meta knowledge, but originally the first version of this chapter had Charles not mentioned at all, and someone was like, weren't they meant to be meeting Charles?" And then Wildbow went back in and edited it a bit to put in the mention of Charles's appearance being delayed more. And I'm kind of like getting the vibe from that of like maybe Charles is just kind of fucked by the spirits running around town. Like, I don't know. I mean, that's not super convincing evidence, but I'm slightly falling. I know this is weird, Elliot, but I'm slightly falling off of the conspiracy bandwagon on this one.
No, I mean that's good because that's the position I've always had that Charles like is just in a shitty situation, and I want to jump back on that. So I'm going to use this as an excuse to flip back to the side I'd rather be on
Yeah,
because like I was finally starting to buy into the maybe this is too much for
too
his self,
sus.
but I
Yeah,
like it better. Him just like yeah, I just almost expect us to like finally get around to dealing with him, and he's just going to have been in pain and suffering for like weeks, and they just
yeah, or
didn't get
like
around to
have
doing
been dead for 3 weeks and
it. Yeah,
nobody has noticed.
exactly.
Uh, um, yeah, but yeah, this is the first chance that the trio has to actually like talk to Toady a bit more about the plan and dive into it and really like challenge it on a higher level.
Yeah, and there's like a bunch to dive into here. One of the first things I want to pull out though is Tetsuo quickly shows his hand with regards to like the information gathering he's been doing because he lists out all of the practitioners they have been talking to, and his list is spot on. Um, and I thought Avery was being pretty careful about how she was going about that. So like, I don't quite know where he's getting his info from.
It's worrying, isn't it?
Yeah, like he's a crafty. I mean, yeah, like Lucy compares him to Guillermo a bunch here, and it's like it's so true. He's a crafty motherfucker, like for a goblin. Actually, just in general.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, that's his whole thing, right? Being crafty for a goblin, I suppose.
Yeah, well, he's got this whole focus on, like here he talks a lot about combining goblin, fairy, and human strengths.
mm,
Like, it's an idea I can really get behind, actually, like, this idea of not wanting to conform to a stereotype or, like, take the easy part, but, like, looking at all these different things and saying, "Oh, well, what are the good things we can cherry pick out of all these different systems to try
mm,
and make a better one?"
mm,
Uh, like, it actually it's kind of similar, like, we've talked about how Lucy sits in that weird spot between being, a bit goblin and a bit fey in different ways, and there's almost some similarities between how her and, Toadstool are approaching this same problem, like, they're both trying to lean into the aspects of each, uh, I don't know, species, and, like, pull out the best parts. Their differences, I guess, more lie in what means they think are acceptable to do that.
mm. Yeah. Yeah. I'm I'm kind of on Toadie's side through all this stuff. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe it's a bit capitalist, but it does feel like the thing that Toad Swallow's plan has that no other plan has had is a justification for why other people would leave Kenneth alone.
Well, and I think like his core ideal of I think goblins can be better, and I want to create a environment where goblins are better.
Mm,
Like, it's hard to argue against that. Like, that is like, it feels to me like a fairly objectively good end goal. I
yeah.
think the criticism the Kenneteers mostly bring up, is this idea of like the ends justifying the means. Like, so Peckersnot comes up as like to me, Peckersnot is, I've been going on about this constantly. Peckersnot is the example of like what we can try and go for. Like, he is much more artistic and all that, and you almost want him to not grow into a violent goblin. But the first thing Toad did when he met him was turn him into a murderer. Um, and so like Lucy sort of brings up this concern where it's like if you're using those tools of violence and stuff to help found your new regime, it, it, that means that you're still encoding it to a degree into the DNA of your new thing, and that can come back to bite you in the ass.
Yeah. It's a fair point by Lucy, right? It's a fair point that, he is doing the thing that he claims to be wanting to avoid, and
Yeah.
that kind of corrupts the purity of what he's trying to achieve a bit. But Toady is a capitalist and therefore has to make use of the tools that he has accessible to him, I suppose.
Yeah, it's like it's a valid criticism, but I think it's arguable whether it's a fair one because I think his argument that he kind of has to like if he doesn't, then it's just not going to work. That he's probably got a case there. So like, I think this is a genuinely like two-sided, interesting debate that they could have.
Mm,
Because I think Lucy's got a point, but I think Toad Swallow does too. So yeah, um, yeah, I don't know, but like yeah, overall, like his idea. It sucks for Kennett to have to be the place to do it, but his idea of the Eighth Court continues to grow on me as a place where he wants to, yeah, create like he was like one of the nerd goblins with Bubblegum and Dee Dee, and it's like he
mm.
just wants more of them nerdy goblins like Peckersnot. I can't not get behind that.
Yeah, totally. You know, his methods may be leading to some problems, but he's trying to do some cool shit. And you know what else? He says explicitly that he doesn't want authority and he doesn't want Kenneth, which is just like an explicit confirmation of like, hey, I'm not doing this for power. I'm doing it for pretty good, greater good kind of vibes.
Well, yeah, I mean, Verona explicitly uses the Bristow test on him, which is, are you willing to do this if you're not the one in charge? And that affects Verona a little bit, just even bringing that up. But yeah, again, Toadslaw is sort of like, yeah, like it doesn't have to be me. I'd probably prefer if it isn't, to be honest. Although his reason for not wanting to be on top is a little bit sus because he's like, he just doesn't want to be, he wants to be the person behind the curtain pulling the strings. He doesn't still want to be the figurehead. Um, so he doesn't quite answer it perfectly, but like, yeah, I think overall, like as you say, he doesn't give the impression he's in this for power. He genuinely thinks this is a better path for goblin kind.
Mm. Yeah. 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 I don't know. I mean, I feel like we've kind of both landed on the vibe of we're on board with Toady.
Yeah, if this story ends with Toadstoy getting his dream to some extent, I'm not going to be upset at all at this point. Like he's even willing to concede stuff like letting the Kenneteers kind of do an ethical pass on some of the products they produce, which I think is a good. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Mm.
So yeah,
Yeah.
I'm behind it.
Yeah. Um. So yeah, putting aside Toadie's market scheming for a moment, the Kenteers ask for permission to go after Marcy, and Toadie says, "Go for it."
Yeah, enough talk of scheming. Let's move on to the fairy.
Yeah.
Um, I again like just more points for Toadstoy in how immediately and readily he just is like, yeah, whatever. And they're like, oh, we want to bring practitioners in too, and he's like, sure. Like the cynic in me feels like you could read this as evidence of him being shifty and wanting to pull something, but I'm definitely choosing to read this as like him kind of backing up what he talked about last week. Like, remember we had that whole thing where he asked the Kenneteers to trust him without telling them about the car.
Mm.
This is the other side of that, in that they sort of trusted him and it worked, and now he's willing to extend the same to them. He's like, "Hey, listen, you guys have a good history with this stuff. Like, I trust you. You don't have to tell me all the details." Like, it's very much him putting his money where his mouth is in terms of what he wanted last week.
Mm. Yeah. Um. Yeah. He's definitely on side, right? He and Rook have kind of got the same vibe to me now of being like conniving or kind of plotting, but like because they're on the Kenneteers side so completely, and that side is genuinely trying to uplift society. I kind of am like, cool, two
Yeah.
thumbs up.
Yeah, there's definitely a very Oni-ish vibe to Toad Swallow, isn't there? Like the way he's breaking the formula of being a goblin and leaning into other things like human and fairy. It has a bit of an Oni twist to it. Like he totally makes sense as a leader in this town, given that vibe, considering it's a place that's trying to buck the trends and the categorizations.
Mm,
Um, I know he's a bit pissed at Rook, as he says, but I feel like those two will actually have a lot in common in a way.
mm.
If Rook can get past his short-sighted greediness, I think is what she called it.
Which is fair.
Oh, I don't know. I think a lot of his arguments here, like he's planning this out like decades in advance. Like
Mm,
yeah, I actually don't know if Rook was fair to him. I think
okay.
she might be underestimating how outside the norm and Oni-ish he kind of is.
Yeah. All right. Leave that thread for later, I suppose. Um. Yeah. It's just I don't know. I'm just enjoying all of these Toadswell interactions. I just love him so much.
Yeah, same. I'm so glad like he's just continued to be in this story and just been a delight. Um,
Mm,
like again to give him even more points, he almost immediately goes from just accepting all of their like requests to going a step above and giving them advice. Um, like he's really one of the people here who's like, hey, you need to change up the sorts of practices you focus on, and we'll get to talk about that a lot next chapter. Um, but he gives them this deadline of saying, "I'm going to revoke all of the stuff I'm giving you within 24 hours," and he makes a very compelling case for that actually being to help them. Uh, like when he first says it, Lucy kind of shakes her head and she's like, "No, we want to track and study them." And Toadstool's like, "You're dealing with a fairy, you tit," um,
mm,
which I just like because this was my big concern at the end of this planning session with Rook. Is it's like the more convoluted and elaborate
yeah.
this scheme feels, the more it's like I worry you're playing on Maricica's turf. Um, so Toadstool, I think, is really smart in sort of setting this restriction, being like, no, you need to get her by surprise. This needs to be chaotic. The more sure you are going in, the more the fairy has already won. And I really
Yeah.
like that point.
Uh, I do like the idea that the more, convoluted their plan is, the more exploitable it is by Marisica. I just
Yeah.
think it's like it's fun on so many levels. It's a really narratively fun thing to do. Like it one jacks up the pace of this story, but it also just kind of leaves us in doubt, makes it so that the conflict is going to be really different and unique. Like, narratively, I think it's awesome.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It that idea that the protagonists have to go in not knowing what they're doing is, yeah, great in so many ways. Um, and yeah, props to Toad Swallow for helping that manifest, and just again, very fairy of him to be like setting this 24-hour deadline because it does so much for him. It like limits the damage to Kennet, helps the Kennetier's plans, and will kind of cover his ass if this all goes sideways and he has to share the blame. He can be like, "Well, I limited it to 24 hours."
Yeah, yeah. What a great strat. Um, so yeah, the group leaves, and Verona starts thinking of all the tools that they haven't used yet that they might try and pull out of their sleeves here.
Yeah, and it's a very like as you're touching on, a very sort of ominously uncertain ending. Like Verona very much leaves this chapter feeling like, oh, we don't have this under control at all. And I feel like that's actually been the vibe since they started plotting to go against Maricica. But like with Toad Swallow saying all this stuff about how the more certain you are, the more you've already lost. Yeah, like you really feel it here, where it's like, yeah, they need to go in half cocked and unsure of really what they're going to do, and that is so fantastic from a meta perspective for us to read.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. um. Yeah. It's just a really fun setup. I'm really
Yeah,
excited to see how it plays out.
yeah, I because like, it's not like there's been so much build up for this one. Like Edith's imprisonment got like 2 chapters set up. I feel like Maricica's has had 6 or 7. Like this one is so much bigger, and it's going to go so fucking all over the place and sideways. I can't wait.
Yeah. I mean, it can't be the final showdown, right?
Oh, I could see it almost leading directly into the final
Yeah.
showdown.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. Like,
Maybe there's so much setup because we're not going to get a break before the grand finale, you know?
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, we still know so little about why Maricica is doing this, and it still feels like there's. Well, I think we know there has to be at least one other sort of major contributor. So it's like this isn't going to be everything, but it's going to like it feels like it's setting up to lead us into that.
Mm, yeah. Um, so yeah, speaking of leading into things, let's go straight into Dash to Pieces 11.12 from Lucy's perspective. And we start with Lucy rounding out a mid-morning therapy session with Dr. Mona.
Who like? I mean, I think we all agree Doctor Mona kicks ass, right? Like.
Oh yeah. It's another example of Wildbow writing a very fun, competent therapist.
Yeah, but this one what doesn't make mistakes. I hope.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, yeah, like I love how Doctor Mona here frames anger management, like, and it really connects with Lucy too. This idea of it not being about suppressing your feelings, but just making sure that you're channeling them in a productive way that actually helps what you want to achieve. Like the a lot of the anger we've seen in the echoes in this arc, like, and that we're going to fight. Also, that they fought a lot in the last chapter. Like all of the echoes that were surrounding that spirit, it was all like unproductive, shitty forms of anger.
Mm,
Like the road rage and the guy slamming the keyboard. Like that's all the shit. Like that's where people need the anger management, right? And it's all about suppressing it. It's about like learning that smashing your keyboard and honking your horn and yelling at people doesn't help. It just makes you and everyone around you even angrier.
mm. I like that. That's a good pick out.
So yeah, I love how Dr. Mona is framing this stuff around. You still need to feel your feelings, and like the righteous anger Lucy feels all the time is definitely a good thing. It's just how can we equip you to make sure that you are actually improving things and not just being angry.
Yeah, I mean, Mona is challenging Lucy not to tear her down, but to build her up in a
Yeah,
very wonderful kind of way.
and not in that like what we saw Connor do last week, where it was very much, oh, we need to all be calm as we have this discussion. Like it's not that it's not saying don't be angry. It's saying like use it in the right way. I feel like that's a subtle but important difference because it's not invalidating the anger. I feel like the way Connor does it sort of invalidates feeling upset.
Mm, yeah, yeah.
Um, and I also think it ties in a really cool way. Like Dr. Mona actually compares like the way that she wants Lucy to tackle conflict and the date that she's getting prepared for, which is a really fun connection I never would have made, but like this idea of like when you go into a date, you put all this energy into preparing and planning to make sure it goes as well as possible and you do things the way that you want. And it's kind of ridiculous that you wouldn't put that same amount of effort and forethought into like the sort of fights Lucy's fighting to make the world a better place.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, it's an interesting thought. I liked the thing that Dr. Monet pulled out here of, prep prep for what you want to achieve out of a fight in the same way you might prep for how you want a date to go. It's interesting. I mean it's I don't know. It I wonder if inherently there's no way to prep for a fight like that without losing a bit of the spark that is, the passionate anger, which maybe is a downside in some ways, but also like that righteous fury that Lucy has kind of defines how she does well in some of these situations, right?
Well, I think yeah, I think it's more about like it's establishing the pattern, right? Like if you get better at like constantly thinking, oh, how should I have done that, and like what are the ways I can do it? Like then she can start to do it in the moment. Like I don't think the end result of this is meant to be never have that like fight in the moment. It's about like practicing going through the process of like okay, how what do I want here? How do we get that so that you can do it more easily in the moment?
Mm. Yeah, fair enough.
Like, yeah, I'd frame it as like, yeah, an expansion of the tool set rather than replacing it, I suppose.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I just wonder if like being too analytical and dispassionate in argument kind of inherently might pull away from your anger.
I think there's like a middle ground with all this stuff. Like, yeah, I agree. And I don't think Dr. Mona is asking for Lucy to, yeah, like always sort of overthink it. But there's definitely like, they bring up examples of like when Lucy maybe wasn't thinking about what she wanted to achieve and was just expressing her anger. And that doesn't work. Like, you need to find that a way to make sure you're expressing your anger in the
Mm,
positive way, like, and only
mm.
focusing on the stuff that you want to change.
Yeah, fair enough.
Um, just one little side pull as well. There's also that part where Dr. Mona is like, I this was meant. You were talking about supporting Avery against Connor. Now it almost feels more about challenging her father's views. And Lucy's like, can't it be both? And Dr. Mona just responds, "You tell me, can it?" And again, that was very Gilliam vibes. Like, poor
Yeah,
Lucy can't get away from people who just want to teach her how to fish. Like, and I think this is the moment where she like fucking there's like
yeah.
a big description about how she's like, got this tortured expression and stuff. Like she just wants answers, and nobody gives them to her.
Mm, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it stood out to me too. I'm kind of struggling to wrap my head fully around why it feels significant, though. Possibly, I wonder if it's narratively Wildbow just thinking that having characters around Lucy to kind of challenge and question her in this way helps to draw out the really interesting parts of her character. Because I think she's someone who feels kind of very set in her ways, and so she kind of needs someone to actively prod her a bit in this mentor or uplifting kind of role, which I think works pretty well. So maybe that's why it feels so familiar.
Yeah, well, it's also she's always had the good instincts. Like that was like the first half of this story felt like it was Lucy learning to trust her instincts, and then it almost feels like the second half has been all the people in her life who are trying to help her be like, okay, now that we've established you've got good instincts, like how do we go beyond the point where you're only acting on instincts, and it's like you take those instincts and you learn to uh like take the next step, and that's not about giving her the answers. That's about like teaching her to go from instinct to yeah, processing like what's next. And I suppose that just takes the form of people uh yeah, doing this frustrating thing where they get her to answer her own questions.
Mm, yeah, yeah. I can imagine it might be a bit frustrating for Lucy.
So Dr. Mona gives her some homework here
Mm.
where she needs to like think of a fight that she's regretted. And Lucy pretty much immediately goes, "Oh, I'm thinking of one scenario I think you might find interesting." I'm curious if you have any guesses as to what fight she's thinking of.
I don't. to be honest. Yeah. Yeah. No, I don't. Like, because there are a few fights that she's been in with like practitioners and stuff that we've seen, but like, how would she justify any of those, explaining those? And she talks about giving a play-by-play. How would
Yeah.
you do that if you're talking about one of these conflicts? Like, although I think it would be fun to see Lucy flexing her, lying but not lying muscles. I just have no idea how that could possibly play out.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like my first two thoughts were something to do with Alexander and Bristow, or maybe something to do with Edith. But yeah, I have the same problem as you. Like, how does she handle explaining that? I-
Yeah.
Is there
Uh,
another more benign fight she's had with a classmate or something that I'm forgetting? She's definitely had some conflicts with them, but I don't know.
Maybe the one with the gym teacher.
Well, no, I think that one gets a shout out in this section,
Oh,
and
okay.
Lucy says
So,
it's one that
yeah, all right. Mona
Dr.
already
Mona
knows
hasn't
about
heard
it.
of.
Yeah, yeah. Fair
Yeah,
point. I have no idea.
I don't know. I feel like we're going to be slapping ourselves when we find out.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if we find out, I don't know. There's so many. I do think it will be delightful to see, but there's so much going on.
Yeah, well, because like don't forget, like we're talking about how we might be heading into the final conflict soon or whatever. We still got to fit in another trip to the promenade at some point. Especially now that Avery's cosplaying as her number one lost fan.
Mm. So yeah, Lucy heads downstairs and checks in on Verona and her mum. Both these young Kennetiers impress Jasmine, and as Jasmine leaves, they start to begin their preparations for the tough 24 hours they'll have ahead of them, or I don't know, 18 hours, or whatever it is now.
I think it's closer to 12. Um, I think there's like a 12-hour gap between 11, 11, 11, 12. Um,
Oh gosh, half time's already half over.
but yeah, I'm so glad we have this moment where like Verona gives the painting of Jasmine to Jazz. And I'm actually really glad we got to see this from Lucy's head because it's glaringly obvious from Lucy's perspective how like nervous and kind of embarrassed and scared Verona is giving this painting to Jazz. And you could almost feel that in Verona's head, we actually wouldn't feel that as much because Verona would just be like, oh, I don't want to think about this. So she's like distracting herself and, be like, oh, Verona said yep a bit awkwardly. But from Lucy's perspective, she's like, oh, Verona said that in a really awkward, like hushed manner. Like, I don't know. I feel like we feel Verona's emotions more from Lucy's perspective than from Verona's.
Mm. Yeah, you're right. I do love that we see this because, Verona has these little moments of being like, oh, yep, thanks, and stuff like this that you can just feel if we're in her head, she would be so downplaying this. But yeah,
Yeah.
the importance that it gains in Lucy's head is so much greater.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. Um, and then Lucy also seems to take my side on like the Jeremy and Verona watch we've been doing for the past couple of weeks. Like, Verona sort of here has this moment where I kind of read it as Verona like grossly or being grossly cavalier about like Jeremy's feelings towards her and like how she doesn't reciprocate them, so like whatever. And I don't know. It continues to feel like she's building up all these barriers to protect her own feelings, and more setting that up to just be a shit to Jeremy. And I'm glad Lucy
Mm.
seems to be getting the same vibe.
Yeah, yeah. It's I don't know. It's worrying, right? Like we've kind of flagged that there's problems in this relationship, and Lucy's definitely on that train too. Um, the moment where Verona just kind of volunteers that Jeremy might love her, and Lucy is just like baffled and looking at her mum, and is like, Verona seems to care so little about this that she'll just blurt out random stuff. Um, I mean, I don't know if that was meant to have more impact, and Verona was like using her distraction as a moment to slip it in without it being able to cause a big fuss or what. But like, it's wild.
Yeah, she does sort of sneak it in there in the middle of a bunch of stuff, so like Lucy kind of has to bring it back up later. Um, yeah, I just continue to be very concerned about the way Verona is building up defenses in a way that feels like it's just going to hurt Jeremy. And as Lucy says, it's going to hurt Verona a lot more than Verona will probably allow herself to admit. Um, so yeah, yeah, I'm still interested to see where this is going. because it feels like unless someone like Lucy intervenes, Verona is going to hurt herself and Jeremy
Yeah.
in the way she's going about it.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it just seems like it's gonna run into problems. We'll see.
Um, oh yeah, it's as Jazz leaves, there's this great moment where she's like, "Oh, don't forget, you can call the neighbor if there's an emergency or Avery's parents." And Lucy says, "Parent, it's just her dad." And Jasmine's like, "Yeah, it's probably better that you call the neighbor then, unless it's like really bad." And I was just like, like Jazz just continues to fucking get it.
Yeah, she does, doesn't she? She's so clearly understands the problems that Connor causes.
Yeah, like, I don't know how much she's clued into the shit Avery's going through right now, but I'd like to think she hasn't even heard about it, and that was just her instinct after meeting him a couple of times. Is just like, um, yeah, I guess use him if, like, the lawyers and police are involved because he's very good at, like, navigating the system, but, like, unless we sort of need to call on those skills, don't bother. He's useless.
Yep. So yeah, the Kenshis knuckle down to get ready for the upcoming fight. They're going over what they have. They're learning some new stuff to use, and they're busting out their new masks. This is a very fun moment.
Yeah. I mean, just this whole like, I guess we've already talked about it a bit, but this whole setup of like, do you remember when the barrier in Arc 9, we first learned that the barrier around the town had this anti-practitioner capability, and we sort of talked for a bit like about how there's that obligatory like superhero story trope where um the superheroes need to lose their powers for a bit, and how it'd be kind of cool to see the Kenneteers do that. This feels like an even better twist on that premise where their powers haven't been taken away, but they're almost being forced to try and use a different set of powers. Um, like being forced to break their own patterns and pull this very like Oni-ish or goblin-y vibe of flying by the seat of their pants and doing stuff that's going to surprise them as much as Maricica. It's just such a fun conceit. Um, it's a great way to challenge the characters and then also provide novelty for us as readers. Like I just love it as an idea.
Mm, yeah, it's it is, isn't it? It's just moving them out of their comfort zone will make us really have to keep guessing. I touch on this as well. I feel like we're going to keep coming back to this because it just is such a cool idea. But I am just so excited to see how it actually plays out.
Yeah, yeah. Like the stuff you mentioned beforehand about how it's like that idea that they have to be uncertain and kind of unprepared as a great narrative device. Like you're spot on. Like it's just the more build up we get for this fight, the less sure I feel about all the pieces that are in it. And yeah, I just can't wait to see this chessboard get flipped.
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, should we talk about the masks themselves? Because it's like
Yeah.
the chapter does this cool thing where it reveals each mask individually, like at the
Mm,
end of a segment of the chapter that focuses on that Kenneteer.
yes.
Like it's a really cool way that the story sort of quickly redefines who they are and how they normally operate, and then sort of says, okay, and here's how they're going to be going into this fight against Maricica.
Yeah. Yeah. It's yeah, it's cool that we get them one by one, and I think the reveal of Avery's at the very end is such a strong moment.
It's a great way to end the chapter, isn't it?
Mhm.
But yeah, should we? I guess while we're here, should we just talk about each of the Kenneteers and how they're going to this fight a little bit?
Yeah. Okay.
Uh, so Verona has switched out the cat for the snake or some reptilian thing, and she's going to be jumping up to the front line and focusing on this half light stuff, which from memory is just like kind of related to what Matt used to do with the heartless stuff.
It's interesting that Waba uses the word half-light, right? Because I googled this afterwards, and I don't think it's that common of a phrase, but obviously it's appeared in something else recently, which is Disco Elysium, which we did on the Game Club.
Is it in Disco Elysium? I don't
Yeah,
think
it's
I.
one of the skills is half-light.
Oh god, I was terrible at learning the skills.
Anyway,
Okay.
I I'm pretty sure Wabo has put some Disco Elysium references into this chapter. I,
Yeah, we'll get to
we'll
the
get to
big
the other
one that
major one
we
soon.
both called
Yeah.
out. Yeah. Oh yeah, it's an aspect of physique. Okay.
Hmm. But it's
Um.
like it's not. Are you familiar with the phrase half light? Like,
No, not at all.
yeah, it's not a common. Like I googled it, and you Google half light, and one of the autocomplete results is half light disco elysium because it's just not a common expression.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, they are both murder mysteries, so,
Hmm.
um, yeah, no, so clearly, Pale will have the same ending as Disco Elysium.
Yeah. Well, well, I was going to say spoil it. Should we? I was going to
No,
make a joke, but I don't know if we should spoil
yeah,
Disco Elysium on this podcast. So
it's not worth it for a stupid joke like that, I
never
don't
mind.
think. Yeah, so I don't know, I like the idea of sticking Verona on the front line, like, I feel like that's really leaning into what we were talking about the narrative novelty and funness of, like, changing it up for the characters.
Mm.
I'm a little more concerned about her apparently changing it up by leaning into the whole thing that was her vibe when she started this story. Like, it's so weird to me that Verona's like, yeah, I need to do something different. Why don't I do the thing I've been talking about doing since day one? Like, that's just
Not different enough, is it?
Oh, she's the one who it feels like is the most in Maricica's grasp in a way. Like she's the one Guillerme's had nothing to do with. Like she leans into the same imagery. The idea that she's going to be on the front line doing the stuff that it just kind of feels like Maricica should be prepared for her to have in her toolbox
Mm.
has me concerned for how Verona's going to do in this fight.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. Should we talk about our sacrificial goat here?
Um, yeah, I mean, it is fun that Lucy is now taking the role of the prey animal out of the three of them.
It Lucy mentions, oh, goats have ties to the occult, etc. And she mentions a few ways how, and sacrificial is slipped in there. And I'm just like, how is that not the first and
Yeah,
most important thing about a goat? The fact that Lucy's mask is a goat fucking terrifies me because it's effectively saying that she's gonna die. Like, that's the foreshadowing that it gives to me. And I think Wabo won't be so blunt about it, but fuck me, right?
yeah. No, you're right. There's almost always a level above the thing you expect with the wild burst stuff, which is why I love it so much. And I don't know what that's going to be, but I have the same concerns. She's not just become the one of them who's the prey animal. She's become the scapegoat. Um,
Literally, yeah. Like, oh god, when I saw this, I was like, I mean, yes, and that's the saving grace of that is it's so against who Lucy is. Like, it's so clearly counter to who she is that if that's what they're going for, they fucking nailed it. But it still is terrifying.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the other side of this is so she as her kind of specialty that she's leaning into is like she talks about all these various kinds of cursing and stuff. There's great words thrown in there that I understand some of. And again, I feel like the first big practice thing we ever saw Lucy do was maybe kind of curse Paul. So there's that same little concern for me as with Verona, where it's like Lucy in trying to change up what she does is kind of leaning into one of the first things she ever tried or ever did, like something that is a bit of a natural fit for her.
Mm.
So I like this as a way. Like I don't know, maybe this is something that can be her specialty. Like it's great that she's reading about it. I don't know if it fits this goal of like being new and surprising as much.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's different from what they've established as their practices, but
True.
it's still something that they have interest in. I do think that's interesting.
Yeah, like I like so Avery is the standout for me in this way because like from day one, Avery has vibed with being a finder. She's always been the runner and the scout. That's been from early arc one. So in this one, she is like the bait, like she's the trap, she's the wall to stop Brisica escaping, and that is
Mm.
expressly against everything she's been about since the start of this story. So I feel like Avery's the one, and I guess it's easier for her because she's had that specialty from day one. But she's the one who feels like she's just gone absolutely against what Maricica should expect because she's going to be sitting and lying in wait, which is just not what she does.
Mm. Mm. Yeah.
So yeah, with Lucy and Verona, I don't get that same vibe of them feeling like they're doing an opposite or a lateral move. It just feels like they're leaning into paths that felt like they were going to take, and then they kind of decided not to.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. Um, Should we touch on Avery's?
Yeah, well, so Avery, like, I mean, yeah, obviously she's going to be the trap and stuff, but like the mask is just, I laughed out loud when I read that she's wearing a wolf mask. That is just hilarious.
It's pretty wild, isn't it?
It's so good. Um, like if we're right about the wolf sort of representing like self doubt or self hatred and stuff, like uh, the idea of Avery turning that into a weapon just sort of does run counter to her whole arc for this story in a way I just think is fantastic. Yeah, I can't wait to see how this manifests in the actual conflict.
Yeah. Yeah. The Avery being the wolf is the one that I am really uncertain about. I mean, the sheer shenanigans of it I do have to applaud. But it's hard to, yeah, I don't know. It's hard to picture what this will turn Avery into when she's trying to embody it, you know?
Yeah, well, I guess I'm skeptical how much the masks will actively change. Like, I feel like it's one of those things where they're going to try to act differently, and the masks would help them lean into it a bit. Like, it's not like they're going to put the masks on and just undergo a magical personality change. I don't think.
Mm,
But yeah, like it's very suggestive that Avery is just going to be leaning into like just being this barrier of like hatred and being a shithead, which just feels very un-Avery, and I'm super into it. Like if she's going to be emulating the wolf, like that's such a great way to start bringing the wolf back into the story because we've been talking about it since the promenade happened. Like the wolf is going to come back in some way, and this feels like a great way to lead into it.
mm, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'm so excited for them. Like all three of these, the way each of them is going into this battle, all three of them have different concerns and levels of excitement from it. It's just this. I'm so hyped for this next day. It's going to be insane.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah, like we've had yeah 6 chapters of build up. It feels like for this
Mm,
one fight, and every chapter I'm believing it going. Oh my god, I'm even more nervous and excited for what's about to happen.
yeah, yeah, definitely. Um, so the trio hire Ram Jam to make their masks even more anti-Fae. Um, and I mean, should we just get into it? Because Ram Jam is being very hardcore here.
Yeah, I originally wrote like, "Oh, he's got some real Kuno energy," and then as soon as I typed that out, I was like, "No, wait, no, he's
It's
Egghead."
Egghead. 100% it's Egghead. Let me read the first sentence of this section. Yeah, woo! Ram Jam danced without rhythm or sense, head banging more than necessary or appropriate.
You actually,
Um,
you that was a really good Egghead impression.
thanks.
So for anyone who is lost, this is our other Disco Elysium reference. Like,
This one, I'm like 90% sure that Wabo is pulling a Disco Elysium nod to Egghead. Like, it must be, right? It's so, I don't know, it's just so hardcore.
yeah, and it's very fun in exactly the same energy Egghead was fun.
Yeah.
Um, like there's even again minor spoilers for Disco Elysium. The first thing you do when you meet Egghead is you have to solve this puzzle of how to talk to him to get him to talk back to you, and they have to
In
do the
like
same
normally
thing
instead of
here.
just yelling random things, which is what Random is doing. Yeah.
Yeah, and like yeah, they have to solve the same puzzle. Of, like eventually, they like Snowdrop figures it out. The Ram Gem puzzle, you just have to tell him he's cool, and then he'll open up and do whatever you want. And it's like that's a bit easier than the Egghead puzzle, but it's the same core principle.
Yeah. It was very good.
I'm so glad that wasn't just me. I was just worried because we've been playing it. I was seeing Disco Elysium everywhere. I'm so glad you got that vibe too.
Yeah.
Um, there's also, uh, and again, this is another one of those goblin scenes. So there's just like a bunch of funny little moments that you can't call out every one. Um, but I just continue to love the vibe of a group of goblins and the way they inject all these subtle gags throughout well, not subtle, but minor gags throughout everything.
Mm,
But my particular standout is the way I think it's Taddy Bojangles. Um, is just she just keeps going against every argument by saying it's semantics, which felt like a bit of a personal attack. But Yeah, it's also just hilarious how she just keeps like arguments that are clearly not semantics. She just keeps claiming that's a semantic argument, and there's nothing you can say against that because it's such a nonsense argument.
Yeah, it is totally nonsense. Um, yeah, but it's a very fun scene. We'll come back to Ram Jam in a bit, but the Kentis head off first to meet Avery and her family. Declan offers an apology. Connor is a wonderful parent again, and all the dynamics are perfect and fixed.
Yeah, congratulations, Connor. You did it. Everything's back to normal. Um, no, I feel like this conversation with Connor really sort of taps into this major theme of Pale, um, which is this idea like Connor sort of blames the fact that he couldn't help properly yesterday because he was too busy dealing with his own shit, and like that's something that's been in Pale, right since Louisa's friend tried to help her on the road but had to leave because everyone was honking their shit at his car, like Pale has had a lot of people in it who are struggling to do what they'd like to do because they have to deal with their own shit first.
Mm,
Um, yeah, but with someone like Jazz, I feel like the story is quite understanding that she's got her own shit going on. Whereas, like, I feel like we're much harsher on Connor because he almost doesn't feel apologetic for not doing it. Like like I feel like if Jazz misses something because she's too busy with her own shit, she's actually like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I should have done better. Like, I'd love to do better." And you're like, "Oh no, it's okay. You had your own shit going on." Whereas Connor just really gives this vibe of, "Oh, there was stuff going on. I couldn't do it. So sorry. I guess it'll probably happen again." Like that's where I feel like that's the part of what Connor says here that I feel like really starts to get to Avery and really leaves you with the sour taste in your mouth at the end of this is like he feels like they did the apology so everything's fixed now and it's just going to happen again. Like there's no sense that any real change has happened.
yeah, he almost it's like he's listening to her without listening to her or something. It's bizarre, right? It really feels like the vibe of it really feels like he's taking steps in the right direction, but without actually listening to Avery about it.
Yeah, well, he's not addressing the core problem. Like he's
He's
like,
treating
"Oh,
the symptoms, I guess. That's maybe how I would describe it. Like,
yeah.
yeah, and it's of course it's good that he at least walks things back a bit, but like he clearly he's still not considering Avery, and it feels like it's a continuation of the same thing that led to her being semi lost before the story, and Connor doesn't really seem to understand that.
Well, yeah, he's not actually enacting any systemic change. Like what Avery talks about later is like they're not changing anything about who Declan hangs out with, what he's exposed to. He's still heading down that line. They just got him to apologize for that one incident.
Yeah,
But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if this is a connection I really should be making here, but it feels like um um I forget the name of the guy, but the guy who was arrested for killing George Floyd.
Chauvin, Derek Chauvin
Yeah. Um So it's like him being arrested for that doesn't fix the
doesn't
core
fix the systemic
problems.
problems that caused that incident
Yeah,
to happen.
the BLM is actually about, and it's like
Yeah.
that's like Connor feels like he's the person here who's saying, "Oh, but we put that guy in jail, so it's good now."
Yeah, let's compromise by okay, yeah, we'll take this action against this one example of the thing that happened. We'll make an example of this situation, but not actually solve the problem.
Yeah, and so like Connor's just letting Declan just sort of go back. Like that feels like the core of what Avery's upset about. Is it's like there's no actual change happening here. It's just like, oh, we get it. He gets in trouble for that one incident, and now it's all fixed.
Yeah. Yeah. It's annoying. I mean, it's frustrating, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it
And
it
it's
is.
like Connor is almost acting like, okay, well, I fixed it, so now everything's good, right? When just like not yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it's like and because he's got the excuse of like, oh, everything was busy and like Declan has ADHD, so I needed to talk to him first, and that like that, it's like it's because he's got reasons for how he did it. He's then sort of saying like, there's no sense that he says he's going to do it differently next time, and like that's the problem. Is it's like, uh, what you want to hear is like, oh, I did it the way I did it because of X Y Z, and now I see that's wrong, and I want to do it this different way in the future. And it's that latter part that he just doesn't do. He's just sort of like he gave no indication that he won't just handle things this exact same way next time. and that's
Mm.
the problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as much as like we're going to talk about like Connor and Declan and Avery here, um, because this is Wildbow, it's not just doing one thing at once, but like this whole segment ties so concretely into what Lucy was learning in her therapy session at the start of the chapter. Like Lucy is almost literally biting her tongue here, um,
Yeah.
and she's
Maybe
very
even literally.
she's very tactical in how she enters this conversation. Like I love the first way she jumps in is her instinct is to like fight Connor on this, but instead what she takes that second, she notices that Avery's pissed, and so rather than like go on the offensive and sort of hurt the group scene, she just like emboldens Avery to stand up for herself. And then later on she jumps in and is like, hey, maybe you need to keep having this talk and like bring your mum in. Like she's like turning it so they get help. And like I just love this as the first example of like what Lucy's trying to learn, which I guess is going from trusting your instincts to then using your read from those instincts to like make sure you're being as productive in achieving your goals as possible.
Mm. Yeah. It's yeah, it's a great example of her taking what she's learned and realizing, hey, this is really useful, and then applying it, and not just applying it, but kind of teaching it almost as well.
Yeah, and because like roping Kelsey in is absolutely the correct move, I feel.
Mm.
She's basically been the only source of Connor getting better in this story that we've seen.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Keep our eyes
I
on it, I suppose.
Yeah, and I'm just curious, like, it feels like this has been a big thing for Lucy in this second half of the story so far. Of like her learning all this stuff around choosing how she fights, as like after sort of learning when she should fight in the first half. And I can't wait to see how this factors into like Operation Marissa capture in whenever it happens, because like this actually feels like it could be something that is a bit of a clincher, because Marissa is probably expecting Lucy to be someone who works on her instincts and might be able to like she might be able to bait her into acting rashly or lashing out, because that is
Mm.
sort of something that Lucy has done throughout the story. So the idea that Lucy's just learnt this skill and started to reinforce it of choosing how she fights, like that feels like that could be one of those moments that's the difference between her, you know, diving in and making a mistake and doing what Mariska wants, and actually like uh beating Maricica at her own game, sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like similarly, I feel like Avery's getting better and better at standing up for herself, and that might tie into
Mm.
like how she works as Wolfie Junior. Um, whereas Verona's the one once again that I'm worried about. Verona changed a lot when she went on her trip with her mum, but since she's come back, I feel like she's just been focused on supporting the other two, and that kind of goes against her role as the front line person here. And also, it doesn't feel like she's had any recent changes in behavior that Marissa wouldn't have picked up on. So yeah. Once again, Verona is the person who concerns me the most going into this fight against Maricica.
Yeah. It's yeah. I definitely. Although you know the we'll get to this maybe in a bit, but the stuff with Avery and like Pam and Kel and the check marks also feels like it's definitely going to come into this. Like it's
Yeah.
pretty clearly going to come into it at least somewhat. So
I mean, the thing I love the most about this conflict coming up is there are so many pieces have been put on the chessboard at this point. Like, the more that happens, the more I lose the ability to even remotely guess where it's going.
mm, yeah, yeah, um, yeah. I don't know. I like we've known these characters for a while, and so we may have preconceptions about how this conflict will go, but they're explicitly playing against their type, so really it could go anywhere.
Yeah, but it's also like I feel like that's easier said than done to like do the opposite of how you normally do things. Like, you know, I feel like in the heat of the moment, you instinctively fall back on your patterns. So it's going to be like something they're probably a bit inconsistent at, which is actually probably to their benefit, because the more they're acting unpredictably, the more Mariska will be thrown off her game. But um, yeah, like that's part of it that really excites me, is like they're trying to be different, but that's so much easier said than done. And watching the moments where they live up to it and they don't will be really interesting.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So yeah, the Kenneteers pick up their masks from the hardcore blacksmith and debrief on Declan's thing. They then call in Nicolette. With all these pieces falling into place, they head out to find and rattle Liz and Sig.
Yeah. And the Nicolette thing, again, just has me a little worried. Like, I mean, I guess this is the whole point of this conflict of why it's so fun is every single piece on the board has some reason for you to be concerned about it. Um, like that's the whole point. You can't be sure, but it's something this story has told us again and again is that when you're looking at someone, that gives them the ability to look back. And
Hmm.
like augurs were the first enemies we saw in this story. Like the idea that Maricica will be totally not suspecting an augur, it feels like that may not be the case. I don't know. Like it's just I
Yeah.
feel like Maricica could be ready for this. Also, the fact that Nicolette can't track the Kenneteers themselves feels like a little Chekhov's gun that Walbo's put on the shelf too. Like there's 100 pieces on this chessboard that's about to get flipped, and I'm worried about all of them. It's so great.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, I don't know. There's, you're right. It feels like it's good. Who knows where it could go? It could go anywhere.
Well, because like we're operating. Well, actually, no. Totoro does bring it up, but like we don't know what Maricica's got up her sleeves, and like so that's the thing. Like it's naive to think that for the 100 pieces the Kenneteers are arranging on their side of the chessboard, Maricica doesn't already have 100 of her own just ready to go when it flips.
Mm,
And that's what Totoro talks about. Like the worst case scenario isn't actually that all of her pieces come out; it's that they don't because she doesn't need them. Um, so it's almost like it's naive to think that Maricica won't have 100 things ready to combat all the wild shit we're already losing track of. But at the same time, if she doesn't, that's actually telling us that we should be even more worried. Like,
mm,
oh, it's so good.
yeah. Yeah. Um, but yeah, that's the end of the chapters that we've got to talk about here. No extra material this week, but before we go, time to dive into some predictions that our community has left in the Power Predictor form that we'll have linked in the show notes down below.
Yes. So I've pulled out a prediction from Zetithers,
Yep.
who basically says, so we've suspected how the lead other influences the state of Kennet as a whole. Talking about like Edith, obviously, affected the immaterial stuff in town, and the town might be getting more goblin-y now that Totoro is in charge, although he's a weird mixed bag, so we'll see. But this user's prediction is that the reason Kennet was able to fly under the radar for so long was in part because Miss, as a Lost, was the one in charge. So just having Miss in a leadership role actually led to the town having a bit more of a natural forgettableness.
Mm,
Um, and yeah, I really like this as an idea that like yeah, I guess that extra little part of why Kennet is just such a shithole middle of nowhere place is because for the last decade or so there's been a Lost in charge of it, and that's just helped it not get noticed an extra
mm.
amount.
Yeah. 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 God, I like this. It makes a lot of sense, right? And
Yeah,
the
it's a great little detail that if we don't get confirmation on anything like this, I'm going to headcanon it until proven otherwise.
problem with it, of course, is that it kind of means that Kennett can never get back to the moderate success that it had while Miss was in charge without Miss being in charge again.
Well, I guess it depends what Mrs. Endgame actually is, which is something we're still a little fuzzy on, both for her and Rook.
Mm,
Like we have a general sense of what those two are aiming for, but like I don't feel like I have a concrete idea of what Mrs. ideal version of Kennett looked like 10 years down the line if the Carmine Beast hadn't died, you know? Like what explicitly was she trying to set up?
mm, yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I wonder. Um, so I pulled out a prediction from user Lapsed Classicist, one of our top tier predictors, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah.
Uh, they are predicting, Gilmay is falling to winter at the end of summer, but of course, in the order of the seasons, Elliot, winter doesn't come after summer. Uh, After summer, we get to autumn or fall for Americans that might be listening. Um, Labs Classes thinks this is Wildbow giving us a hint that actually Guillermo isn't going to fall to winter in this sense. Maricica is plotting to save Guilherme by instead kind of manipulating him into becoming a autumn fairy instead, who are, we were told, are those who have the least kind of likeliness of falling to winter. And yeah, that's the explanation for the killing of the Carmine Beast, is Maricica's plot to save Guilherme, in quotes.
Yeah, because obviously, I think the idea of Maricica doing this to save Guilherme is something we've seen before, perhaps from Lapsed Classicist. I'm terrible at remembering who says what, but I like the idea because we don't. I think it's been said that fairy can change courts,
Mm,
but aside from falling to winter, I don't think we know what that looks like. Like, is there a process, or can a fairy just wake up one day and be like, "I'm sick of this shit. I'm going to summer." You know, like we don't know what it entails. So maybe the idea that this is all an elaborate plan to redirect his fall somehow, like, is definitely possible.
mm, yeah. I just think, we're kind of still waiting on a twist for Marcy in this showdown, and I think this would be a good one.
Yeah, because like, there's definitely the angle. Like Guilherme is mentoring Maricica a bit, but it's hard to tell whether that's just because that's his shtick or, um, like whether they're actually just good friends. And I don't know. I always come back to this idea that Maricica is like a young fairy, and that maybe means she's a bit more of a radical. Um, but I still don't know what that means. So yeah, we'll see. Hopefully, we're going to see soon.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, that's Pale predictions. As a reminder, we're still running our discussion question, which we'll be getting to the answers next week. So make sure you get your answers into our discussion thread. The question is: now that we've seen both Nettie and KT, what do you think one of the offspring of your city's city spirit would look like, or not look like? I mean, look like and be like, I suppose.
Yeah, physical descriptions aren't against the rules.
Yeah, but just try and
Um,
describe some of the other personality quirks as well.
yeah, we've got some really great answers to this already. I really like where people are taking this. So please, if you haven't already, get your answer in.
Mm. Yeah, you can get that answer into our discussion thread, which we linked in the show notes down below.
Yes, you can also find us on Twitter. That is where we post all sorts of things, including apparently now, just how you doing messages.
Yeah, yeah, all kinds of things go on that Twitter. Um,
Really, you're not gonna you're
what?
not gonna explain that at all?
I don't know what you're talking about. The
Yeah.
Twitter has just things that go on it of all variety. Okay.
This
Um,
this is explained in our Discord if anybody's confused about what the hell we're talking about.
if you want to join the Discord, the right way to find your way into it is by going to the Duff Media website, duffmedia.com. You can find links to the Discord and links to all the other shows on the Duff Media network, including Game Club. We just started our new Game Club for this month. We are doing Doom, the 2016 Doom, I suppose.
Yeah.
This one does not run on anything. In fact, it is having some trouble running on my computer, which is moderately good. So that's worrying.
Yes, you can watch me stream it. Unfortunately, Ruben's streams are still TBD.
Hmm.
Until you can sort that out. But I'm having a blast so far.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm also quite enjoying it. If you want to participate in the game club, again, come to the Discord, duffmedia.com/Discord. Or if you want to support the Duff Media Network and all of the shows on it, you can head to the Duff Patreon at patreon.com/DuffMedia to become a patron, get all kinds of bonus content, get all kinds of cool bonus things and thingamajigs.
Yes, and don't forget to stop by a Wildbow's Patreon, patreon.com/Wildbow. He needs to start saving for all the cool stuff he's going to buy from Toad Slow's Market.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, there's going to be a lot of Patreon money that's needed for that. So make sure you head on over there to support him.
And with that, we'll see you all next week for, I mean, I'm guessing
It
the end of Arc
feels like
11.
the end of the arc, doesn't it?
Yeah. It
But we'll
feels like
see.
maybe we'll get an interlude or something,
We'll
and
get the
then
Maricica interlude we've been waiting for. The reveal all
yeah,
the
and then
tricks.
open Arc 12 with the bullshit, the
Hmm.
explosion of bullshit that is about to happen.
Yeah.
See you then.
See ya.